I have with me today veteran Ambassador Shyam Saran. He was India's Foreign Secretary and also Chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. We are going to understand from him India's foreign policy, how it had been in the last 10 years of the Narendra Modi government, and going forward, where are some of the key relationships are headed. Welcome to ABP Live, sir, and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Sir, so let us start and understand, what has been and how has been India's foreign policy stance in the past 10 years. Now that we are going to head for another decisive election, we've seen foreign policy strategic issues taking a center stage. Where do you see some of the relationships are headed? Let's say India's relationship with the US, China, we'll touch upon those. But generally, how do you see it has been?
So my general sense is that there is a considerable amount of continuity as far as the drivers of India's foreign policy are concerned. Of course, there will be differences in the manner in which the foreign policy is pursued, the nature of the diplomacy which delivers on the foreign policy. The personality of the leader makes a difference, again, in terms of style. But as far as major drivers of Indian foreign policy are concerned, they are very much rooted, first of all, in the part of the world where India is situated. Secondly, our historical experience. Having been through long years of colonial rule, it should come as no surprise that there is very strong, I would even say almost a fierce commitment to keeping India as an independent agent in international affairs. It has always been the case that India has wanted to play an active role in international affairs, in the United Nations, and those have not really changed. It would be fair to say that because India's economy has developed, India is today seen as the fifth largest economy in the world, a major economic and commercial opportunity for the world, that it has opened up our diplomatic space. So we are seen as a much bigger actor than perhaps was the case before. And I think it would be fair to say that the Modi government has tried to leverage these new assets which have come to us in order to advance India's regional profile as well as global profile.
So when you talk about new assets, what is it that you are exactly referring to? And the fact that we've seen India taking a very strong stance in some of the issues. What do you have to say to that?
So, as I said, while the foreign policy itself may be fairly consistent and there is a degree of continuity, the manner in which it is expressed or pursued, that is, the nature of diplomacy itself, may differ. So, today you are right in terms of our stance on several issues which are important to India. We take quite explicitly a very strong stand. We don't seem to be defensive about upholding what are seen as India's interests. So the manner in which the kind of idiom through which that same interest is expressed or is safeguarded, perhaps is somewhat different. That's why I also mentioned that the personality of the leader also makes a difference in terms of the style with which foreign policy is carried out. It would be, I think, correct to say that under Prime Minister Modi, there has been a greater reliance on leader-to-leader diplomacy.
Okay.
And that is something which perhaps was the case also if you go back to the past with Jawaharlal Nehru. I mean, his personal relationships with various leaders of the world, the kind of almost a kind of an empathy that he had developed with some of the leaders of the non-aligned movement, that made a very big difference in terms of India's stature in the world. So the personality of the leader counts. You may have had some prime ministers who were more low profile, who did not, have a very kind of an assertive kind of personality. So I think we should make a distinction between the two. So I would say, as someone who watches foreign policy, I find it more remarkable that there is an element of continuity, despite what we see as changes that may be apparent in terms of how we carry out diplomacy. I am more impressed by the fact that there is a certain underlying continuity in our foreign policy, which is quite remarkable. So you mentioned in your early remarks about our relations with the United States. Now, in the relations with the United States, if you take Prime Minister Vajpayee's time, that is when really India-US relations started becoming an important factor in India's foreign policy. Uh, you had a Congress government after that, the UPA led by Congress. And many people expected that they would go slow on India-US relations. In fact, it was the UPA government which really took the relationship uh, to a stage which maybe people had not even expected. With this, for example, the nuclear deal. And then again, when Prime Minister Modi came in, people were apprehensive that maybe the same attention would not be given to India-US relations, because you remember he was even denied a visa to go to the US, which they changed, of course, fairly soon. But many people expected that there would be a certain shall I say, inhibition in taking the relationship forward. And yet, under Prime Minister Modi, perhaps India-US relations have reached a stage where you could say that this is one of the strongest partnerships India has ever had in its independent history.
So now, since you talked about the fact that there has been an element of continuity, uh, I mean, from Prime Minister Nehru's time of non-alignment till today of strategic autonomy, do you see any difference what Prime Minister Modi says in terms of exercising strategic autonomy vis-a-vis non-alignment? How do you see that aspect India has steered?
So, the more basic concept, I think, is strategic autonomy. And strategic autonomy is a very misunderstood term. I mean, many people reject it as if, this is something which is quite inappropriate in terms of the kind of international situation which we face today. Strategic autonomy only means that a country like India, which is a major power, it is not maybe a superpower, but it is a major power, uh, it should be in a position to take relatively autonomous decisions on matters which are of vital interest to India. Okay. So, not that you have to take a independent decision on each and every issue, but there are issues where the decision making should be done in India, not determined by some other capital. So that is very important, that you have an agency over those key issues which are of importance to India. Okay. Now, I said relatively autonomous. Why did I say relatively autonomous? Because you are living in a landscape of several sovereign states. So, no state, even if it's the most powerful, can define its interests in absolute terms without caring for the interests of other countries. So that is why it has to be relatively autonomous. You have to constantly balance your interests against the interests of other countries. That is the only thing that you can do in terms of how we live in a multi-state landscape. So it is in interacting with other states, we try to see how we can maneuver ourselves in this competitive landscape. How do we maneuver so that we are able to promote our interests to the maximum extent possible? Now, I don't think that that particular objective really has changed very much since Nehru's time. It may have been articulated as non-alignment at that time. It may have been, also called multi-alignment sometime. Or we say today we are following strategic autonomy. Or somebody says, we are not following any ism. we are following a very pragmatic foreign policy. But whatever the label which you put, at the basic level, I think that objective has, to my mind, not changed very much.
So now, if I come to some of the key relationships, I mean, focusing on neighborhood, coming to China, we've seen the standoff that began, although it started on a very, I would say, a happy note with both leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, doing two informal summits, not one, where they had, direct one-on-one conversations also. But then immediately after that, we saw them, I mean, India, China having a standoff, and that happened incidentally right after abrogation of Article 370. Now, where do you see that happening, the disengagement process? Although it happened, but it has slowed down majorly. We know from the armed forces that huge number of troops are still stationed there. Uh, where do you think the relationship is now finally going?
Well, it's difficult to say where the relationship is going because a lot depends upon China. I think what has changed is that uh, during, say, from the 1980s onwards, both countries had come to a certain broad consensus. That is, while we continue to make every effort possible to resolve the long-standing border issue, at the same time, we should try and develop all other dimensions of our relationships. Okay, whether it is trade and commercial relations, whether it is cultural exchanges, whether it is working together on several global issues which we have common interests on. I worked very closely, for example, with my Chinese counterpart on climate change negotiations. Or if you ask many of our trade negotiators, they will tell you that India and China were also working very closely together, for example, on international trade negotiations
At the
under the
WTO.
WTO. So, over a period of time, this consensus held that, we have this border issue, let us try to resolve it. Until we manage to find a solution, we are committed to maintaining peace and tranquility on the border. And this was, by the way, not just a principle. On the ground itself, it was that we would not have, like we have today, large number of troops confronting
Right.
each other. It was also agreed that when our patrols go in areas which perhaps there may be differences of opinion with regard to where the line of control is, they will not be carrying arms. They will not get into a physical kind of any kind of physical contact. They will make their point and they would disengage. We set up a number of consultative mechanisms through which, in case issues arose at the border, there was a mechanism at the level of the border personnel meetings. There was also a forum at the level of the ministries.
There was a
uh,
dialogue
yeah.
also.
So, and you had multiple levels at which issues, if they arose, and they did arise because there were differences, they can be dealt with, they can be resolved. So you had a set of protocols with regard to the dealing with the border issues, and you also had, as you mentioned, the special representatives, mechanism to try and see whether the two sides could actually reach a settlement on the basis of a political understanding, not as a technical map making exercise. And that institution is still there. What is perhaps different this time is that what could have been a issue which arose, which could be dealt with through those mechanisms, there was a certain unilateral, move by China to transgress the LAC. And that has resulted in, as you said, deployment of very large number of forces on both sides. Now, this is completely contrary to the peace and tranquility agreements.
So do you think, sir, that China has given us a signal that all those mechanisms have become irrelevant for us?
Well, whether they are giving a signal or not, the fact is that those mechanisms are not as effective in our being able to manage the border issue as they were in the past. So, this is why I'm saying that, even though those mechanisms were there, if China had some concern or difficulty with respect to Indian conduct on its side of the border, why did not it resort to that mechanism? Rather than, try to resolve this through military means, which is what they tried to do.
Right.
And there is no good explanation from them about this. So you can only speculate. So my speculation is that, you see, when the two countries were more or less at similar levels in terms of their economy, in terms of their military strength, there was greater willingness to try and, respect each other's sensitivities. Now, when you feel that you have become like a superpower, the Chinese sometimes say that we are 5 times your size in terms of GDP, that we are a very, very large country. Are they trying to suggest that, um, where we were sensitive to difficulties which arose in the past, now we are not willing to show that same sensitivity because, you should defer to us.
Right.
Right? Now, that is something which, of course, India will not accept. That you try to slot us into a kind of an inferior position and say you have to accept that we are a more powerful country and what we say goes. That is not acceptable. So, partly my own sense is that partly the new kind of behavior which we are seeing on the part of China is partly related to that sense of, we are a powerful country. We don't need to pay as much attention to the concerns of this neighboring country as we were willing to do in the past.
So, is this the reason why do you think, sir, they are not moving ahead as was expected on the disengagement and the de-escalation
Well,
process? And what will happen to this standoff? Will this go on for a long time?
we have to wait and see. We have also had standoff in the past, which also went on for many years. You remember,
The Sumdaungchu.
Sumdorongchu, that also was resolved after several years. So maybe this may continue for a longer period of time. But the good thing is that both sides have agreed to remain engaged with this process of trying to find a way out and try to resolve the remaining points at which we are still at a standoff. Some other points have been already resolved. So let us see. It's good that both sides still remain committed to that consultative process, to that process of talking to each other, and hopefully we'll be able to find some way out.
But sir, how do you see China, coming close to our neighbors also? Of course, they have their own sovereign rights, but this always becomes a point of strategic concern for India. Whenever, let's say, the Chinese ships visiting Sri Lanka or, them going ahead and making more deals with Bangladesh or Nepal for that matter.
Gone are the days where we could say that, South Asia is our backyard, and that nobody should intrude into this space. That is no longer possible. I think the India's uh, policy should be with regard to the neighborhood. We say neighborhood first policy. We should translate that into real action. Whether it is in terms of deployment of human resources, whether it is in deployment of, economic resources, we should really put neighborhood right at the top of our diplomatic agenda. That is something which is crucial. So even though rhetorically we have accepted that neighborhood is first, but actually if you look at the manner in which we engage with our neighbors, and the kind of policies that we follow, it does not really conform to that neighborhood first principle.
Why do you say that, sir?
So, with respect to trade and connectivity between the two sides. We are good thing is that we are improving connectivity with our neighbors. But even if you have very nice railway lines and you have very good highways, if the movement of goods and peoples across the border is still taking place hours and hours, at a time, then that is not good connectivity. And there are ways in which you can deal with security concerns that you may have about cross border movement, but you really, if you want to make this into an economically integrated space, then you have to do much more in terms of really making the cross border movement as smooth as possible, almost like national a national treatment.
Yes.
The other is with regard to, say, transit. Now, India is the largest transit country, right? If Nepal wants to trade with, say, Bangladesh, it has to go through India. If Bangladesh wants to trade with Pakistan, it has to go through India.
Correct.
With respect to others as well, India is the most important transit country. Now, as a transit country, your effort should be to present yourself as the most preferred partner for your neighbors. So, with respect to, for example, trade, I have said again and again that if you opened up your market to virtually anything which your neighbors produce and want to sell, it would still be a small fraction of your market, because you are such a large market and you are an expanding market. You could actually become the engine of growth for your neighbors, right? Secondly, with regard to, for example, transit, why do you need to specify which railway line you are going to use, or which highway you are going to use, or which port you have to use? You open out your transportation system to your all your neighbors. It will again be a very small fraction of the total cargo volume that is carried by your transportation system
But won't
or
there be
handled by your ports. This way, you see, you encourage the integration of your neighbors' economies with the Indian economy. And once you develop those kind of interdependencies with your neighbors, then there is a certain kind of political stability will also come with regard to your relations with them, overall
But
relations with
won't
them.
there be a security threat aspect to it, sir?
So that's why I said that as far as cross-border movement is concerned, today you have number of technologies which are available to you to give you the assurance that 95%, 96% of the cargo which is moving across is in fact safe. After all, you have cross-border movement of cargo in Europe. You have next door with ASEAN, you have cross-border movement. They have managed to deal with the security issue precisely by using modern technology, whether it is use of holograms, whether it is use of satellite-based tracking systems. You have at the border, you can have fixed scanners so that you don't have to stop every truck and open it and see what is inside. So there are ways in which you can actually deal with the security concerns that you have and yet ensure that there is a relatively smooth movement of peoples, of goods, and even I would say of ideas across the borders. So economic integration needs to be an Indian project. Only India can lead that. If you have a sense that we have to protect ourselves vis-a-vis our neighbors, then you start getting into a kind of a siege mentality. You should not have a siege. If you have a siege mentality, then of course you open a spaces where other external powers will find opportunities to come.
So you think China is able to do that
Yes, well,
with the Belt and
if
Road
you,
Initiative?
you open, as I said, you open up and leave empty spaces, somebody is going to walk in, isn't it? So you have to, it is not that you have to match China project for project, or stadium for stadium, or factory for factory. No, you have your own strengths vis-a-vis your neighbors. After all, the kind of cultural affinity, the kind of people to people density of relations that you have, Can China match that? No.
Mhm.
Or the proximity which you have to all your neighbors. Proximity is a very important factor in terms of competitiveness.
Mhm.
But that competitiveness will only operate if you have good connectivity and you have good, smooth movement across the border. So why not use your proximity to your neighbors as an asset which China does not have?
Mhm. So something like that we had, but then that process never really took off to that extent. Is the SARC initiative, but then there was again this issue between India and Pakistan that had stalled the process. How do you see we dealt with Pakistan again? I mean, we first saw former Pakistan Prime Minister coming to Prime Minister Modi swearing in, then him going and having a sudden visit in Pakistan, but then we stopped talking after all the terror attacks. How long can this continue? Do you think not talking to Pakistan has benefited us? And also now we have gone ahead and dealing with the Taliban in Afghanistan, right? How do you see this dichotomy, so to say?
So, longer term, I cannot see an economic integration project in South Asia succeeding without making Pakistan a part of that. Okay, so overall, we still need to think about South Asia or the subcontinent as one single economic
Unit.
space, as one single cultural space, as a single geopolitical unit.
Mm-hmm.
And India has to lead it because it's the largest country in the region. So, long term, we cannot exclude Pakistan. It is not good for India to exclude Pakistan from that subcontinental integration project, whatever may be the difficulties that we have. Now, it is true that we have major, security problems with respect to Pakistan, and every time we have tried to improve relations, something or the other happens in terms of cross-border terrorism, and then that's a setback to the relationship. So it is frustrating. It causes resentment, but I think India will still need to keep the door open to engagement with Pakistan. And you mentioned the issue of Afghanistan. To me, what is happening in Afghanistan and between Afghanistan and Pakistan is also creating an opening for you,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So today, actually, a Pakistani friend told me that the most peaceful border for Pakistan today is the border with India,
India.
because they are having so many problems with the Afghans, and they are having so many problems with Iran.
Mm-hmm.
So, a new situation has arisen in this part of the world, and Pakistan is also following the change in trends globally as well. You remember how the China-Pakistan economic corridor was presented as being a game changer,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese said that it is the flagship project for the Belt and Road
Mm-hmm.
Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Do you hear any talk about
No,
the
and there had been
CEPC?
so many attacks on
Yeah,
Chinese workers,
yeah,
which has
yeah.
completely slowed the
So
process.
that has not worked out.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, China's exposure to heavy burden of debt, Pakistan's exposure to heavy debt to China has only increased,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, in the old days, when Pakistan used to be in deep economic trouble, as it is today, it could always count on some assistance from the US, some assistance from China. If not them, at least the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia or the UAE. That you see today has diminished because Pakistan's sort of value as a geopolitical entity in this part of the world has diminished. US is not so much interested in Pakistan anymore because it is no longer there in Afghanistan.
Right.
Earlier, Pakistan played a role in enabling the United States of America to maintain a strong presence in Afghanistan. Today, they are themselves withdrawn. So there's not much of an interest there. China, which would have again wanted to use Pakistan's good officers to try and establish a good presence in Afghanistan, today finds that Pakistan and Afghanistan are daggers drawn. So that role cannot be played. In fact, it is establishing its own direct contact with the Taliban government.
Mhm.
As you have seen, China has replaced its ambassador,
Yes.
which
Mhm.
others have not. The kind of value, geopolitical value that Pakistan was always very confident of being able to use whenever it got into economic issues is no longer the case. So there are voices in Pakistan which are saying that maybe the way out for us today from this economic crisis which we are facing is to see whether we can not reopen, trade and investment contacts with India. Try and see whether this can help us in overcoming the economic crisis we have. So I certainly see that there is an opening, but I am also realistic enough to realize that perhaps until the elections in India are over, perhaps this may not be possible.
Mhm. Mhm. So now coming purely just on Afghanistan, now there are so many questions coming up on the fact that whether or not India should deal with the Taliban. We've seen that we've had 4 or 5 meetings with them. Our MEA delegation goes there and meets them. Then we want to make Chabahar also activated and be a part of it. Um how do you see those dynamics working out, yet we are not opening up the visa regime? Do you think that is I mean, in the future it's going to be a cause of worry, or we should go ahead and deal with them?
Well, I mean,
And
uh,
previously we've not done that.
we are having limited contacts with the Taliban. And irrespective of the Pakistan factor, which many people are saying you're doing this because,
Hmm.
the Taliban is now hostile to Pakistan. Therefore, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that principle at work. But I think we should realize that Afghanistan has an importance for India in its own right.
Mhm.
Not
Yes.
just merely a kind of a ploy or a proxy against Pakistan. Even though that might factor may be there, but Afghanistan has a value for India, an importance for India, which goes beyond that very limited kind of value. And that is its position at the crossroads of Central Asia. So, for India to have any kind of credible Central Asian policy, if you do not have a strong relationship with Afghanistan, it is not possible to think in terms of a credible. And you mentioned Chabahar. Chabahar, the importance of Chabahar also lies in being able to use that to link up with Afghanistan,
Mhm.
because we don't have direct access through Pakistan. So, if we are establishing these limited contacts, ensuring that we have some presence in Afghanistan, because of that larger strategic, importance, I cannot fault the government for, taking advantage of whatever opportunity may have opened in order to establish those contacts. But we have been very careful. You must have seen the statement made by our national security advisor at the SCO, security national
Yes.
security advisors meeting, where he has drawn attention to the fact that we are worried about the possibility of a revival of these terrorist networks using Afghanistan as a platform. So those
Mhm.
concerns have not
Mhm.
gone away. And secondly, I think we also have to recognize that with respect to our relationship, particularly with the Central Asian republics and with Iran, Afghanistan will always continue to play an important role. And therefore, it is important for us to have some presence there to see, and to keep track of what is happening there. And lastly, there is a certain responsibility that we have towards the people of Afghanistan. And at a time when they are undergoing great difficulty, food shortages of medicines, medical care, if we are able to at least deliver some of that humanitarian assistance to the people, that also I think is a good approach to take.
So now coming to our relationship with the US vis-a-vis Russia. Now we've seen while in this 10 years of Prime Minister Modi's rule, we've aligned more towards the US. We've also, done lots of deals with Russia. Despite the war, we have increased our trade and oil purchases with them. But somewhere, do you think this balancing act may be a little challenging going forward?
I do not think so, because I think the United States of America does acknowledge the reason why we have to maintain a certain, positive relationship with Russia. There are legacy reasons, because if you take the 30 years of Indo-Soviet partnership, we developed a very strong defense relationship. Uh, it is not possible to change that overnight. In order to make certain that our defense assets are maintained in good order, we continue to be dependent upon Russian supplies, components. Secondly, there are also certain key areas where, even despite the very close relationship that we have established with the US, there are areas where even the US is not ready to share technology with us. Take the nuclear submarine technology. So there are areas where we still uh, need access to high technology, which only Russia is ready to give. So there are good reasons why it is in our interest that we maintain that more relatively more positive relation. It doesn't mean that we therefore support Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think even in his conversations with Putin, Prime Minister Modi has made it very clear that
Yes.
This is not something that we expect a great country like Russia to engage in this kind of aggression. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is with respect to what you mentioned in terms of buying oil or accessing energy supplies from Russia. Well, there is a certain double standard as far as the West is concerned. The US may not be buying oil and gas because US itself is now an exporter, but there is still European countries are still buying oil and gas from Russia. There is still a pipeline through Ukraine which is supplying gas. Maybe not to Western Europe, but certainly some of the East European countries are still dependent upon those supplies, which have not been cut. You see, even Europe has said that only by 2027 would be able to really stop being dependent upon Russia for any kind of energy supplies. So I think we need not be too defensive on that score. There are countries which, in terms of their own interests, they have been making various kinds of compromises. They should not be pointing fingers at India.
Sir, and also now coming to the fact that how Indo-Pacific had become, it has become a cornerstone of the foreign policy and also India's defense strategy. We are seeing the kind of activities the Navy is taking in the maritime domain with the Red Sea crisis, of course. But otherwise, also we are now aligning more with the islands, and the fact that although there has been a change in Maldives, we are now focusing on Mauritius as well as these key strategic locations. We've just opened a naval base, in Lakshadweep. How do you see that turning out? Do you really see the maritime domain is going to be the most important security aspect for India in the coming future,
Well, I
especially
mean,
with the Chinese threat?
Well, it's not just a response to Chinese threat. I think it has been for a long time now. I think there has been a realization in India dating back to Mr. Nehru's days. I mean, you just read Panikar's works on the Indian Ocean. The fact is that India, if you look at its geographical location, if you look at the shape of its peninsula, uh, there is no doubt the maritime domain is of critical security concern to India. So this is not of recent origin. This has been the case for a long period of time, and India has, right from the beginning of its independent existence, identified the Navy as a very key element of its military and security capabilities. Now, of course, there is the issue of resources. We should have been investing far more resources to developing our naval, fleets, but it's also a fact that because of the fact that we have faced threats from Pakistan and from China, so willy-nilly we have had to deploy more resources on the armed forces, land forces. So India will certainly keep expanding its naval capabilities, not only just to meet China's threat, but to become the main security provider for this Indian Ocean region. So the fact that we have tried to develop some kind of a common security forum with the Maldives, with Mauritius, with Seychelles, and India itself, to try and see how we can ensure that certainly the Western Indian Ocean is a peaceful place, and that it does not become a kind of an arena of conflict. Because our security very much depends upon that. Now, there will always be maybe some setback here, some setback there. You mentioned the current problems with the Maldives, but I think longer term, whichever government there is in Maldives will also see its own interests in working together with India to really ensure that there is relative peace and tranquility in this region. Because even though like Mauritius, the Maldives is a small country, but it has very large, exclusive economic zone, which needs to be monitored, which needs surveillance, which needs to make sure that there is no overfishing by, people coming from outside. So India is able to assist them in this regard. So that value, I do not think will change. Yeah.
And so my last question now that, almost, I mean, the 10 years have passed. There were so many talks of India having a national security strategy and probably theater commands. You being a veteran diplomat, from your perspective, do you really think now is the time when India should have a security strategy, a national security strategy, or we need to go for theaterization? Or do you think we can manage the way we are existing right
I
now?
think the problem is not that we don't have a national security strategy, but it is not public. It is not something which has been subjected to debate. It is not something which has been subjected to, wide consultation, which is what you should do. It should not be something which is just determined in a small, group of people. So we have had, when I was, for example, in the National Security Advisory Board, we had developed some kind of a, draft national security strategy. But the idea was that this would be open for very wide consultation amongst people who are security analysts, diplomats, and others, who would then, try to enrich the document by whatever views they may have. So that exercise we have not been through. So it is not as if we are completely ad hoc. There is within the system, there is a strategy in terms of, okay, where do we want to be in 10 years' time? Where do we want to be in 20 years' time? What are our main threats to our security? What are the ways in which we try to deal with, say, new sources of threat? Like what may happen with the kind of technological change which is taking place? What does AI mean in terms of our security? So those exercises have been done in-house, but uh, I think what is perhaps important is that, like other countries, we need to put that into the public domain, so that even with respect to other ministries, agencies in the government of India, they have something in their mind as the template on which they should take decisions. So it should not be like in silos, because we are living in a world where there is so much of cross domain activity. There are feedback loops. You do something in this domain, it has a feedback on in some other domain. So you have to be aware of those kind of interconnections. So if you have a national security strategy, then those interrelationships become very, very obvious. Your link between, for example, domestic security, external security, the link between, say, environmental security and national security. What is the strategic communication strategy that you need to have? How do you explain to your people why you are doing something, why you are not doing something? How do you ensure that there is a channel for feedback from people on whatever you are doing? All those things can only be encompassed in a kind of a coherent national strategy. And the importance is that in a very complex government, where there are so many arms of the government functioning every day, they don't have a single template on knowing, okay, this is the overall kind of objectives that we have, and how do we ensure that the decisions we take in our own domain corresponds to or aligns with that strategy. So that is something which we need to look at. So I did see a report that the Modi government is also thinking in terms of drawing up some kind of a national security strategy. So I hope that when they do it, and they also make it public.
And so, what about theaterization? Do you think we need to go for that? It's high time, or
Well, I'm not a military person,
but
so
yeah,
I can't really say anything about that. But during the time when we were doing national security work in the National Security Advisory Board, all our discussions led to the conclusion that theater commands are essential. Why? Because today's warfare is not again siloed in land warfare, air warfare, maritime warfare, or even communication warfare. All these are linked together. So the importance of the theater command is that in any particular theater, you have each arm of your armed forces working together. That is because there is then a certain coordinated and coherent approach which is possible, because all future wars are going to be integrated,
right.
where all the forces will have to be integrated. So from that point of view, theaterization is the right step to take.
Sure, sure, sir. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
That was Ambassador Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary of India, talking to us about the last 10 years of India's foreign policy and where things might be headed from now on. Thank you for watching the interaction for ABP Live. This is Nayanima Basu with Sanchit on camera.